Yung ano eh. Piologo.
Sir, ask ko lang po kung
Oh.
ano po. Kung lahat po ba ng members magsasalita po?
Hindi, kung hindi magsasalita lahat, sabihin nyo kung sino yung wala. Iba, grade nun, mas mababa.
Okay po, sir. Bale lahat po talaga, sir.
Oh, PBA 1 ito ha.
Okay
Kasi
po.
wala pa naman
Thank you
tayong
po.
PBA eh. PBA 1 to. Tsaka binigay natin yung buong lecture last meeting para dito. Start na? Pwede na kayo mag-start? Nabigay pa tayong kahit 2 minutes.
Sir, okay na daw po.
Okay, start na ha. Start na kayo. Sige, so pwede kayong pwede nang kunin yung pwede na mag-share screen. So linawin ko, lang ako ha, mag-roll ko lang ako ha. Alaw, nandito? Mag-raise hand o kaya magbukas ng mic. Alaw, nandito?
Yes po, andito po sir.
Algire.
Andito po, sir.
Okay, Banaag. Banaag po, Banaag. Kung wala mag-raise hand, kung walang mic mag-raise hand o kaya mag-chat ha. O siya, walang Banaag. Hernandez.
Sir?
Okay. Erica, Makilan.
Andito po.
Okay. Pepito.
Andito po, sir.
Okay. So start na ha. Start na po, guys.
Sir, kita po ba?
Sir, nandito ba na?
Oo, kita po. Yun, si Banag pala nandito.
Sige po,
Start na ha.
Start ko na ba?
Good evening sir, good evening classmate. This is our report. Ang first step ng pagdi-disassemble is remove left cover. May 5 step po ito para po matanggal yung left cover ng system unit. Ang first step po is turn off the computer, monitor, and peripherals. Make sure that everything normally attached to your computer is turned off and unplugged. Ang second step po is make sure din po na nakatanggal po yung computer sa wait lang po. Make sure po naka-unplug yung power cord sa likod ng PC. At yung third step po is remove the screw from your PC back or outside edges. Many PC use two large thumb screws along one edge, other use Phillips head screw. Some new models have sides that simply flip down when you're depress a release. Ang fourth step po is remove the PC cover or side panel. On some computers, the cover slide towards the front, others come out the back. You may need to pull pretty hard. Ang pinakahuling step po is while the case is off, take take your computer outside and use a can of compressed air to blow out all dust from inside. Yun lang po yung akin, sir. Thank you po.
Good evening po, sir. Before we start, let me discuss about the power connector. What is power connector? Power connectors allows electronic devices to available power outlets. Power cables can carry either alternating current AC or direct current DC. An example of AC power would be power that is provided by a standard wall outlet in home or office. A power connector is a piece of equipment used with many different types of electronics, allowing a significant electrical current to pass into it. There are also some devices that have removable plugs, such as a computer monitor that can be disengaged from its power connector. What does a CPU power connector do? The desktop computer power supply converts the alternating current from a wall socket of main electricity to a low voltage direct current to operate the motherboard, processor, and peripheral devices. The way to, ito po sir yung paano po disassemble po yung power connector. First thing po sir, we need to make sure the PC is naka-unplug na po. Then po yung tatanggalin na po yung power connector, make sure po na maayos po yung pagkakatanggal. Kasi po sensitive po yung mga parts po nito. Tas ito po, those pictures are the steps how to disassemble the power connector. Ayan po yung step po. First yung nakakabit, and second po, pagtatanggalin na po. Ayun. That's all po sir. Thank you.
Hello po. Good evening po. Rinig po ako ng ayos.
Yes po, ma'am. Go na po.
Number 3 po is remove the IDE cables. IDE po means Integrated Drive Electronics. First po, what is IDE cable? It is a type of cable used to connect some hard drives po and optical drives to each other and dun po sa motherboard. Sa pagtatanggal naman po nito, the IDE cables needs a better care while being removed as it may cause the damage to drive connector pins. Means po, hindi po siya kailangan ng sobrang pwersa po sa pagtanggal. Gently wiggle the cable sideways and remove ganun lang po siya kadali po tanggalin. Yun lang po, thank you.
So, hello. Ang sasabihin ko po ngayon is yung paano tanggalin yung power supply. Bago ko simulan yung step-by-step ng power supply, ano nga ba ang power supply? A power supply is an electrical device that supplies electric power to an electrical load. The primary function of a power supply is to convert electric current from a source to the convert voltage, current, and frequency to power the load. So, disassemble power supply step by step. 1. Undo the screw on the back of the case. 2. Remove the cover. So, yung sa 1 at 2 daw, ang gagawin is kailangan tanggalin yung nakakabit na tornilyo sa case. At kapag natanggal mo na yung tornilyo sa case, pwede mo na rin tanggalin yung cover. 3. Remove the power connectors that connected to the motherboard. 4. Remove the other components, computer components. 3 and 4. Ang gagawin dito is tatanggalin ang nakakonekta sa power supply tulad ng 24 pins ng motherboard, 4 pin ng CPU, 6 pin ng video card, hard disk, power, at optical drive. 5. Now remove the screw of the power supply at the back. 6. Easily remove the power supply. Ngayon, tatanggalin naman natin yung tornilyo na nakakabit sa power supply at kapag natanggal na natin ito, pwede na nating simulan na tanggalin ang power supply ng dahan-dahan para hindi ma-damage yung ibang parts. Next. So, meron akong video na inanda para mas makita nyo talaga kung paano nga ba ginagawa ang pag-disassemble ng power supply. Thank you.
Number 5, remove the expansion cards. But first, what is the expansion card? It is a circuit board that can be inserted in a computer to give extra facilities or memories. Like you can insert here is the flash drive, network cards, or audio card. So how to remove an expansion card? So in removing the expansion card, first you need to locate the expansion card and move the other obstacles and cables that can interfere with the removing of the expansion card. Then unscrew or release the screw or the latch holding the expansion card slot cover, and make sure that there are no other cables attached to the expansion card. Then gently pull out the card using your thumb and finger. When you remove the card, just hold onto the metal plate part or the edges and don't touch any contact or anything on the PCB to prevent any damage on the card. Thank you.
Good evening po, sir. I'm Christine Joy Alguire, and the assigned task that I'm going to report how to disassemble But before that, let's talk about the purpose of a hard disk drive in a. So what is hard drive? Hard drive in a computer keeps anything from images to audio to document. In short, they gathers all of the information on the computer. Also, hard drives known as storage drives and they are removable disks that can be used on different computers. So how to disassemble a hard drive? May video rin po akong inihanda para mas maunawaan niyo po yung sinasabi ko. I-explain ko po siya habang nagpe-play po yung video. First thing we need to do is to find a few basic tools to get started. These are flathead screwdriver, precision or torque screwdriver set, and vice grips or pliers. Now that we have everything that is needed, let's make a start. To begin with, determine the front and back of your hard drive first. The front normally has a label or sticker, while the back usually has some kind of circuit board which you can see in the video. Then the next step is start by removing the screws that hold the cases top in place. This is where we need the Torx screwdrivers. After you remove all of the screws, it must be able to simply lift the top of the case off. If the lid is still stuck, we should remember to check for hidden screws and might need to use a flathead screwdriver to pry it off. And as you can see, when you finally open the case, there are the different parts in the hard drive, and these are the platter, which is the round part at the bottom, and this is where the data is stored. Next is the little arm called the actuator. It acts a bit like the tone arm on a vinyl record player. Spindle, this is the cord that runs the platter and determines the speed of the spinning measured in revolutions per minute. Ito po yung nasa gitna ng platter, yung maliit pong bilog. And the first one that should lift off is the red head. Although you may need to use a flathead screwdriver to remove it, as it will be magnetically stuck to the other components. Now remove the actuator arm. This will often hinge on a single central flathead screw, so remove that as well. It may have a small cable connecting it to a circuit in another part of the drive, but you should be able to fold it out of the way with relatively little trouble. Once the actuator arm is removed, you should be able to see the second magnet. This may be held on by one or two more torque screws that is also need removing, and which you can see in the video. Next step is to remove the magnets from the backing plate. This can be difficult as not only are they magnetically held on, but they are usually glued on too. The easiest way to separate the two is by using a vice grips or pliers, but as you can see in the video, we can also use a hammer and a chisel. Then after that, carefully bend it in a such way that the magnet will be slightly freed. And the final disassembly is to remove the spindle by using a Torx for the screws. And now you can take the platter. Then lastly, the motor, which is also needed to use a Torx. And that's it for how to remove or disassemble a hard drive. Thank you.
Number 7 po, remove motherboard. Sa pag-remove po nito, yung need po na gumamit ng screwdriver po. The motherboard has screws holding it to the frame, which are indicated by large white circle around them. Remove those screws, and pagkatapos po tanggalin nun, you need to keep them po para pag binalik nyo po uli, hindi po magkukulang-kulang yung screw. Double check and make sure all wires and screws have been removed para po pag tinanggal nyo na po yung motherboard po dun sa mismong case ng computer is wala pong sagabal po. Then carefully remove the motherboard from the computer case. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Sir, ako naman po sa number 8 po. Sa pagtatanggal po ng processor fan with heatsink po. Ito po yung video na bago po mag-explain.
Pero hindi mo naman PC yan, ha? Sana PC ng iba yan. Baka
Hindi
yun.
po, sir.
Ayan, ha?
Hindi po.
Kala
Video
ko
lang po.
kamay mo yan, ba't maugat?
Hindi po.
Okay, ha? Basta ganyan lang, Huwag niyong pakialaman yung mga unit niyo, baka hindi na bumalik yan, eh. Baka masira, wala na kayong gamitin. Pero tawag niyan, no? Parang mabigat yung niyo. Parang gaming PC yung niyo.
Pang gaming po, sir.
Diyan mo yung sound card, L na.
Ako po, L na. Tuloy ko po, sir.
Mga kusig, go na, go. Guys, remind ko lang, Taripe tsaka Kizana, ba't kayo nagla-like ng post ko? May klase tayo, Dapat lang, pag alam niyo may klase tayo ngayon, lang, view lang. Ako nga nagmo-multitask, kayo nagtitingin din kayo ng FB niyo.
So, bali, sir, explain ko po.
No problem.
Explain ko po kung ano yung ginawa. Follow a diagonal pattern across the CPU cooler using a screwdriver. Turn each spring screw a full turn counterclockwise. Continue until each spring screw is separated from the motherboard backplate. Lightly twist the CPU cooler clockwise and counterclockwise to loosen the seal between the heatsink and the lid of the CPU. Carefully lift the CPU cooler from the CPU. When done correctly, the CPU should remain seated in the socket. Bale, ito naman po yung number 9, remove processor po. Ito po yung video. Bale sir, explain ko na lang po yung ginagawa dito. Bale po, ito po yun. Sa pagtatanggal po ng, ng processor po. Number 1 po, remove CPU cooler. Start by gently nudging the cooler in one direction until you feel some resistance. Once you feel that hindrance, make the motion in reverse until you encounter another resistance. In other words, use a very delicate back and forth twisting maneuver to remove the cooler. You shouldn't have too much difficulty loosening the cooler and then lifting it completely. If the heatsink appears to be stuck to the CPU, you may have to warm the thermal paste a bit. Warming the thermal paste using a heat gun might work, but be careful not to overdo it. You can also try nudging it very gently to loosen it, but again, don't apply too much force when you make the motion. If you pull the cooler too aggressively, the CPU will be yanked out of its socket. This can damage both the CPU and the connector. Once a pin stays within a socket, your motherboard gets permanently damaged because you cannot replace the socket. With these possible scenarios, always make it a point to apply delicate pressure whenever you handle CPU components. Bale po, sa pag-a-assemble naman po tayo, sir. Ako po yun sa step 1. Step 1, mount the processor. The first step for assembling the computer system starts with mounting the processor on the processor socket of the motherboard. To mount the process, you don't need to apply any force. The special ZIF or zero insertion force sockets are usually used to prevent any damage to the processor pins. Once the processor is mounted, the heatsink will be attached on the top of the processor, and the CPU fan is also attached on the top of the heatsink.
Tapos, ang step 2 po is fix the motherboard. Then, kaya nga po yung sabi ko po kanina, kailangan nyo po, nakip nyo po yung mga screws po mula doon sa pagkakatanggal nyo para po sa pagkabit nyo po uli sa motherboard, hindi po kayo maghanap po ng ibang screws. Then, ilagay nyo lang po uli ng maayos po yung motherboard doon po sa computer case. Then, i-screw nyo lang po uli pabalik yung mga screws. Then, ganun lang po siya. Thank you.
Step 3, connect the power supply. Now, line up the power supply at the back end of the cabinet and screw it. The power connector for motherboard, power supply, and CPU fan power supply are to be connected. If the cabinet cooling fan is required, then it is to be screwed at the back and grill of the cabinet, and its power connector is to be connected from SMPS. Thank you.
Step 4. Install the CD or DVD drives at the top front end of the cabinet and screw in. Install the hard disk drive and floppy disk drive below CD or DVD drive and screw. Make sure once screwed there is no vibration in either of the CD or DVD hard disk or floppy disk drives.
Step 5, connect cable. Now select the appropriate data cable and connect one end of the cable to its drive socket and another end to its appropriate connector on the motherboard. Yung mga cable po na sinasabi dito is yung mga IDE cable, SATA cable po. Yung mga ganun po. Thank you. Then, ang step 6 po ay yung mount the memory module. It is time now to mount the memory module on the motherboard by aligning it on its socket on the motherboard. Press it downward na tama lang po yung pwersa na ginagamit mo para hindi rin po siya ma-damage or ano po. Make sure the side tab are fixed. If it's not, you may still have to press it a bit po para po magsakto po talaga yung pagkakalagay niya po. Thank you.
Step 7. Install the internal cards to its socket and attach the cables or power cable to it. The selection of the right socket or slot is required as per the type of the socket. Thank you.
Sir, ako na po sa step 8 na wala pa si Banaag po. Step 8. Cover the tower. Cover the tower by placing it and pressing towards front side and screw it. Yun lang po, sir. Thank you po.
Sir, last step po, step 9. Connect the external device and power. Connect the external devices with CPU at its appropriate socket. It includes mouse and keyboard at PS2 or USB connectors. Monitor at the video output socket. Connect the power cable to the back of tower in SMPS. Plug the power cable to the electric board. Pagtapos na po yun, sir, ibalik na po yung side panel. Tapos yung i-screw na po dun sa sa likod po. Tapos yun na po yung lahat, sir. Ayun lang po yung aming report. Thank you po. Salamat.
Okay, thank you
Yun
guys.
lang po, sir.
So,
Thank you
okay,
po.
okay. Okay, so pakita ko lang yung next ano natin ha, para ano natin, para kita nyo yung next group. Kita po yung screen ko guys, kita yung screen ko. Hello po, kita yung screen?
Kita po, sir.
Okay, so okay, so kita po yung yung group ni Monte Alegre. Nandito ba kayo?
Yes, sir. Dito po.
Okay, so request access na ha. Ano na po? Tawag dyan. Start na kayo.
Sige po. Present ko lang po.
Oh, go.
Nakikita na po ba, sir? Nakikita na po.
Oh, kita na yung screen mo. Kita na yung screen. So, ano na. Buksan mo ng PowerPoint. Ay, teka, linawin ko lang ha.
Good
Barqueros ba nandito?
Opo, sir.
Sabas. Nicole, nandito ka? Wala. Series muna.
Nandito po si Nicole, sir.
Pwede nga salita.
Di bali may wala po siyang mic, tapos may
Okay.
masama po pakiramdam.
Wala nang mic, masama pa pakiramdam. Paano mo babakunahan yan? O si Taripe, di ko na itatanong. Naglalike ng mga post ko to eh. Di na itatanong to kung nandito ah. Nagmumultitask ako. Nagmumultitask ako. Nagmumultitask ka rin. Nakikita pa tayo sa FB. Wala niya. Ortiz, Chrysler, dito ka?
Opo, sir.
Triple ka. Dito?
Andito po, sir.
Omboy, dito ba? Kung wala ako na bahala kay Omboy. Di baka may ito. Dito pala ito online. Tapos Gian Rentaso.
Nandito, sir.
Okay. Boss Badon, dito ka? Please Gian. Dito sa East yan, wala. Hindi, ako na lang din pala dito. Sige, start na, ano mo Telegram.
So sir, good evening po. I'm talaga po reporting tonight, and this evening we're gonna learn about on step by step on how to assemble a PC.
In step 1, install the processor in the socket. This is probably the hardest part of the whole assembly process. The socket pins are very sensitive and you have to make sure you don't damage them in any way. Don't bend, pull, or break them under any circumstances. A damaged socket is very difficult to repair and you will lose the warranty on the motherboard. First, open the socket using the locking mechanism. See the motherboard manual for details. If you look at the socket and processor more closely, you will find that both components have matching notches. These notches ensure that there is only one possible way to install the processor correctly. Note that there is a small arrow on both the processor and the socket. The arrow tells you how you should orient the processor in the socket. The processor must be inserted gently so that it snaps into the socket on your first attempt. Don't even think about adjusting it inside the socket. If you feel this doesn't fit, simply remove it and try it again. Thank you po. Yun lang.
Step 2. Install the CPU heatsink. The first part of the PC assembly process is done. Now you should install the CPU heatsink. Follow the instructions as specified in the manual. With, in, with Intel 6 and 7 Gen processors, be extra careful to make sure all the bolts are tightened evenly. Take your time, pay close attention to what you are doing, and tighten the bolts in a crosswise pattern. These processors have very thin printed connections and tend to bend at the corners. Yun lang po, sir.
Step 3. Install memory module in the motherboard. The installation process may vary depending on the motherboard type and model. Some motherboards have only two memory slots, others four with dual slot motherboards. You just fill them all with 4-slot motherboards. You have mount at least 2 RAM stick to ensure dual channel operation. Check the manual for details in the figure. You see the correct procedure for installing a RAM module in the DIMM slot. The module must fit into the slot securely. Sometimes you may even need to apply a slight force to snap the toggle in place.
Step 4. Install the graphics card. The next step in building your PC is to install the graphics card. Most modern graphics cards are rather hefty, so you need to hold up the card during installation. In most cases, you use the first PCIe 16X slot to mount the card. It's the one closest to the CPU socket.
Step 5. Di bali sir kay Sabas po, ako na lang daw po mag-report sa kanya. Connect the SSD HDD drive. To install the SSD as a secondary drive, not your primary or boot drive, use a SATA cable and attach one end of the cable to the SATA connector on your motherboard. Attach the other end of the SATA cable to your crucial SSD, then use an available SATA power cable coming from your system power supply and connect the cable to your crucial SSD. A hard drive is installed is a fixed drive by either by sliding drive into the bay and securing it by inserting screws through the chassis and into the drive, or by attaching drive rails to the drive, sliding the drive and rail assembly into channels in the chassis. Depending on the mounting arrangements, you must weigh not the need to attach rails to the hard drive before installing it.
Step 6. Connect the PSU to the motherboard. To see if everything is working as it should, plug in the motherboard power supply 24-pin ATX and the processor power supply 8-pin EPS. The corresponding LED on the bottom of the board should light up. Some boards require only 4 pins EPS, others 8 plus 4 EPS, or even 2x8 16-pin EPS. Para naman po sa step 6, para makita kung gumagana ang lahat ng tama o maayos, dapat isaksak ang motherboard, power supply at processor power supply. Dapat po yung LED sa baba ng board is umiilaw. Yun lang po.
Step 7. Test the assembled PC components. If your motherboard doesn't have a dedicated power or start switch, you have to connect to PWR-SW contacts to turn the board on. It's not that hard, so just use screwdriver. If you get a picture and can get into UEFI, then everything is probably fine. At this stage, you can either install the operating system or mount the components in the PC case and leave the OS installation for later. It's up to you.
Yo, sino yung naka-assign sa step 8?
Oo, wala lang sa step 8. Wait. Okay. So, step 8. Install the motherboard in the PC case with the components already mounted. Or how to build a PC guide is nearing the end, and this step is the last time you have to work with the hardware. Now disconnect the power supply, SSD, and graphics card, and you can begin installing the motherboard in your PC case. Some coolers also allow you to install the motherboard with the cooler already mounted. Start by installing the motherboard I/O panel. First, you have to install the so-called I/O shield, which is the back panel of the motherboard. Comes included with other motherboard accessories. Next, how to install the motherboard in the PC case. How to build a PC. Insert the motherboard into the case by snapping the rear part, the one with the connectors in the I/O panel. Make sure you align it correctly, and check if the holes on the motherboard fit with the standoff locations in the case. Step 8, cable management. We recommend reading the manual that came with your PC case. as it will give you some idea how cable management is supposed to work. In this particular case, cable management and the way power supply cables are laid out has a significant impact on the overall design and airflow efficiency. The manual will also tell you where and how you should place the disk, SSD or HDD, or optical drives, which is important because every PC case model is different. Next, plugging in the cables, connectors, switches, etc. How you Once you have the motherboard installed, plug in the rest of the connectors, such as USB audio fan connectors and case cabling. The video shows how you should connect the USB connector to the case. Keep in mind that every motherboard has a slight different connector layout, so always follow the instructions as specified in the manual included in the packaging. Connecting the peripherals, keyboard, mouse, monitor, etc. Once everything is plugged in, you can attach the both side panels. Then connect the power cord to the power supply and connect the LAN cable to the rear I/O panel, equipped with the keyboard, mouse, headphone, or audio connectors. If you don't have a dedicated graphics card, connect the monitor to the appropriate connector, HDMI display port on the I/O panel. Otherwise, connect it to the graphics card. The PC is complete installing the operating system and stability testing. The hardest part is done, so now it's time to install the operating system, namely Windows 10, because anything else would be a waste of time and money. Installing Windows 10 at home means you have two options to choose from. Either you have an installation DVD or you have a make bootable USB flash drive. The second option is usually significantly faster, especially if you use USB 3.0. If everything goes well, you should be able to log into your Windows account in less than 15 minutes. Rentaso, hello. Yan ka ba?
Good evening. And tonight, we're gonna also talk about the step-by-step on how to disassemble a PC. Tara. Step 1. Unplug your computer and peripheral items. Turn off the computer, unplug the power cord, and unplug any peripheral items attached to the computer, such as keyboard, mouse, monitor, headphones, and any external drives. Wear a ground strap or touch an unpainted metal part of the computer to discharge any static electricity. If you walk across a carpet at any point, touch an unpainted metal part of the computer again to discharge the built-up static electricity. Step 2. Remove side covers. Remove at least one of the side covers, usually the right side as you face the front of the computer. You might find it easier to access all the parts if you remove both side covers. There are sometimes the thumb screws on the covers to make access easier. Step 3. Disconnect the connectors. Disconnect all the connectors, then remove any card readers and internal DVD players. These are usually screwed into place. Step 4. Remove standalone fans. Remove any standalone fans. This is a good time to remove any dust, lint, and pet hair from the fans if you're planning on reusing them. Step 5. Remove the storage drive. Disconnect the cables and remove the storage drive. Generally, storage drives are held into place by multiple screws. If you have a hard drive, be gentle. When moving the drive as hard bumps as a damage can damage the internal parts.
Step 6. Remove memory RAM modules. Remove the memory RAM modules by pushing the clips on both ends of the module down. This will cause the module to pop up for easy removal. Do not touch the gold connectors on the chips if you're reusing them. If you're using the modules, if you're not reusing the RAM, find out it can be used in other applications. Step 7. Remove power supply unit. Remove the power supply unit by unplugging the remaining connectors, then unscrewing the unit from the frame. Step 8. Remove motherboard adapter or expansion cards. Remove any adapter or expansion cards from the motherboard. Also, these cards usually slide into pre-configured slots. There can be screws. Do not touch the gold connectors on the cards if you're installing the cards. Step 9. Remove the motherboard. Disconnect all the cables from the motherboard. Then unscrew it from the frame by loosening each screw a little bit before going around to loosen each screw properly. This prevents any potential warping of the motherboard by gradually releasing the tension on it. All the components should now be out of the computer case. If you're using the case, this is a good time to get rid of all dust and lint that might have collected. And that's how you disassemble a computer. Thank you. And this is the this is the name of of my group mates in group 2. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, so okay na po. So dire-diretso lang tayo kasi inaabot ng 20 to 30 minutes isang group eh. So targetin natin matapos lahat. Okay, so tingin mabuti. Kita na yung screen ko, guys. Hello po, kita yung screen ko. Hello.
Kita pa, sir.
Okay, so
Opo, sir.
start na tayo ha.
Go, press.
So si Press Escort, bukas ka na ng ng tawag dyan. Teka. Ano ko muna. So ano po magsabing present o mag-raise hand. Pasamba, dito ka? Press Escort, nandiyan ka? Ayun, okay. Si Press Escort, nandiyan. Serato, parang nakita ko sa Serato kanina. Nag-chat to eh. Serato po, Serato. Ayun, okay. Del Rosario. Walang Del Rosario Pasistol, Ezra.
Present.
Okay. Atila, Iskisol.
Present po.
Okay. Ashley Leasing. Okay, dito pala si Lay. Sheila May Aguilar.
Present po.
Okay. Idol Pete Lim. Walang Pete Lim. Wala. Okay sana hindi ko natatawagin nag-ano rin to nagmo-multitasking din to Teacher nagmo-multitask pati estudyante nagkikita kami sa FB. Okay, tas Gayas. Gayas po. Gayas, nandito ka ba?
Sir, si Gayas po is may turok. Nagpaturok po siya kanina. Hindi ko lang po alam kung
Ay, okay.
makapasok.
Hindi, ano na yun. Understood na yun. Okay, so start na kayo. Start na. Start na Pasamba
So, good day po sa inyong lahat. Kami nga po pala ang Group 4. Before po tayo mag-start is papайлala ko lang po sa inyo ang mga kamiyembro po. Kamiyembro ko po. Starting with Ariel Samba Jr., Mark Serrato, Ezra Fasistol, Enrico Del Rosario, Ashley Leasing, Atila Red Kiskisol, Sheila May Aguilar, Pete Lim, Maricar Gayas, and Koshi Cyrus Cristiana.
You might think
Disassembly assembly of system unit. You might think that disassembly and assembly of the system unit is easy. Yes, it is provided that you have done it correct and safety. The first thing that every computer technician should keep in mind is safety. We need to remind the general safety. Safe working condition help prevent injury to people and damage to computer equipment. A safe workspace is clean, organized, and proper lighted. Everyone must understand and follow safety procedure. Follow the basic safety guidelines to prevent cuts, burns, electric shock, and damage to eyesight. As the best practice, make sure that a fire extinguisher and first aid kit are available in case of fire up or injury. This is partial list of basic safety precautions to use when working on a computer. Remove your watch and jewelry and secure loose clothing. Turn off the power and unplug equipment before performing service. Cover sharp and edges inside the computer case with the tape. Never open a power supply or a CRT monitor. Do not touch areas in printers that are hot or that use high voltage. Know where the fire extinguisher is located and how to use it. And keep food and drinks out of your workspace. Keep your workspace clean and free of clutter. And bend your knees when lifting heavy objects to avoid injuring your back. Remove side cover, unscrewing the screw on the rear of the case, sliding the cover back about an inch and lifting it up used to be an unconventional method of removing tower cases. To complete the work, screwdrivers of the appropriate types are required. Step 2. Remove power connector. Disconnect all the connector, then remove any card reader and internal DVD players, These are usually screwed into place. Step 3. Remove IDE cables. The IDE cables need better care while being removed as it may cause the damage to drive connector pins. Gently wiggle the cable sideways and remove it. Step 4. Remove power supply. The power supply supplies power to every component in a computer. Therefore, it has the most wires of every other component in the computer. The first thing you do is unplug every wire coming from the power supply. The list below is everything that you have to disconnect. 1. Motherboard, very large connector or plug. CD, DVD, drives power. Internal hard drive power. And number 4, portable hard drive slot power. And 5, once everything is unplugged, unscrew the screw holding the power supply in place. On the back of the computer, next, push the power supply from the outside, then lift it out. Step 5. Remove expansion card. Remove expansion card. Remove any adapter expansion card from the motherboard, although this card usually slide into pre-configured slot. There can be screws. Do not touch the gold connector on the card if you're reinstalling the cards. There should be single screw on top of each expansion card slot, whether it's occupied or empty. Remove the screw on the occupied card slot. Once the screws are removed, you should be able to remove the cards by pulling them carefully upward. Some expansion cards have cables leading to other parts of the computer. For example, the TV card is connected to the connectivity center on the front. Step 6. Remove hard disk drive. The CD or DVD drive is one of the easiest component to remove. First, unplug the ribbon from the back of the drive. Once that is completed, pull on the tab securing the drive in place. Then push it out from the inside. If you don't have a second drive, there should be a flat piece or metal covering the drive slot. Follow the inscribed instruction to remove it. Step 7. Remove motherboard. After you've disconnected the various cables and any hardware obstructing motherboard, remove the screw that secure the motherboard to the computer case. Be careful not to let your screwdriver touch the motherboard itself when removing this screw, as it may cause damage. Once you have removed all the unit screw, you may carefully remove the motherboard from the computer case. Disconnect all the cables from the motherboard, then unscrew it from the frame by loosening such screw a little bit before going around again to loosen each screw properly. This prevents any potential warping of the motherboard by gradually releasing. Removing motherboard, you generally just grab on the connector and pull it away from the connection. Repeat the same process for all connection, and then you can tuck the cables out of the way. Removing a computer processor Step 8. Remove processor pan with heatsink. With some computer, the pan may also be screwed into the heatsink. If you see screws on the heatsink and you only want to remove the pan, unscrew any screws and disconnect the pan instead of unlatching the heatsink. Do not pull hard. The heatsink should be able to be removed with very little upward. Removing a computer processor pan from the computer is a relatively simple process and may be necessary to clean the pan or replace a bad or noisy pan. Before disconnecting the heatsink pan from the computer, disconnect the pan power wire. A 2, 3, or 4 pin power cable should be connecting the pan to the computer motherboard. Locate where this cable connects to the motherboard and disconnect it by grabbing the connector end and pulling up on the connector. Step 9. Remove processor. Flip the metal bar to loosen the metal clamps that holds the CPU in place. Carefully raise the clamps away from the CPU after you loosen it. Use 2 fingers to lift the CPU out of its socket. Lift the processor directly upward and avoid moving it side to side while it socket. Ang CPU at CPU socket ay partikular na marupok, kaya maingat na hawakan ng mga ito at alisin lamang ang processor kapag talagang kinakailangan. Ang ilang bahagi ng computer, gaya ng mga video card at RAM, ay direktang na-access kapag binuksan mo ang case ng makina, na nagbibigay daan sa iyong alisin at palitan ng mga ito na may napakakaunting pagsisikap. Ang Central Processing Unit, gayunpaman ay nasa ilalim ng heatsink at pan na ginagawang mas mahirap i-access.
Assembly. The assembling of a computer system is the opposite of the disassembling of a computer system. Make sure you have the screws and a screwdriver before you start assembling the computer system. Step 1. Mount the processor. Mounting the CPU on the motherboard processor socket has been the first step in assembling the computer system. There is no need to apply any force to mount the process. To prevent any damage to the processor pins, special ZIF zero insertion force sockets are typically used. The heatsink will be attached to the CPU after it has been installed. On top of the heatsink, the CPU fan is mounted. Step 2. Fix the motherboard in the tower case. The motherboard is now to be installed vertically in the tower case, also with screws going from behind it. Step 3. Connect the power supply. Now, screw the power supply in place at the cabinet's upper back end. Connect the power connectors for the motherboard power supply and the CPU fan power supply. If a cabinet cooling fan is required, it must be connected to the cabinet's rear end grille, and its power connector must be connected to the SMPS. Step 4. Install the drives. Install the CD or DVD drives in the cabinet's top front end and connect this with screws. Screw the hard disk drive and floppy disk drive beneath the CD or DVD drive. Make sure the CD or DVD, hard disk, or floppy disk drives don't vibrate after they're put in. Step 5. Connect the cables. Pick the right data cable and connect one end to the driver socket and the other end to the motherboard appropriate connector. Use SATA cable and power cable for SATA hard disk drives or CD or DVD drives. Else, use IDE data cable, make the required jumper settings for application. Step 6. Mount the memory modules. Now is the time to place the memory modules on the motherboard by aligning the RAM with its socket on the motherboard and pressing it down. Check the side tab is firmly attached to the RAM notch. If not, you may have to press a little harder. Step 7. Install the internal cards. Connect the cables or power cable to the internal cards and insert them into the socket. The type of socket needs the selection of the correct socket or slot. Step 8. Cover the tower. Cover the tower by pressing it against the front side and screwing it in place. Step 9. Connect the external devices and power. Connect the external devices to a proper socket on the CPU. It includes with a mouse and keyboard and PS2 or USB ports. The monitor must be plugged into the video output socket. In the SMPS, connect the power wire to the rear of the tower. Connect the power wire to the circuit breaker.
Sir, may dadagdag lang po kami na hindi po nasabi ni Sheila May Aguilar. Sheila May Aguilar pasabi na lang.
Conclusion of assembling and disassembling a computer system. Assembling and disassembling a computer system is not a difficult task, but requires keen observation and knowledge of the different components of the system. You need to be extra careful when fitting in these components and make sure that they are not fitted forcefully but firmly. In case of hardware failure or to install new add-on cards, you need to have good knowledge to assemble and disassemble a computer system. Once you have assembled your computer system, the next step is to install the operating system so that you can start using the computer. Thank you.
That's all and thank you po sa pakikinig sa report namin. Yun lang po.
Okay, so guys, yung next group tayo ha. Kita po yung screen ko, hello?
Kita po, sir.
Okay, so ready ha, 4 na group na lang naman. Okay, so yung Gotenko group. Okay na kayo dyan? Teka, hanapin ko lang yung ano ha. Sino ito? So, pataas po ng kamay, Gotenko. Dito ka ba, no?
Sir, mahina daw internet na.
Ano, sige, ano ko na lang. Sabihin nyo mag-chat dun sa GC ha. Miss Sanchez. Bien Sanchez. Casey Bien Sanchez. Parang ayun, okay. Thank you. Sagit. Boss Sagit. Yun, okay. Aldep. Aldep po, nandyan. Okay. Magpugay. Okay, Cantalejo. Okay, so si Canilio nagpaalam to kanina ha, kung wala dyan. Ay, nakabalik pala. Nakabalik pala si Joshua. Okay, Miss Borromeo. Okay, and Sir Rosalita. Okay, so start na kayo guys. Share screen na kayo ha.
Okay na sir, naka-share na po.
Okay na. Start na kayo.
Good evening po sir. Papakilala lang po yung mga group ko. Butenko, Sanchez, Sagit, Aldep, Magpugay, Cantalejo, Canilio, Borromeo, Rosalita. At ko yung kay Gotengo po, ako na po yung magsasalita. Remove left cover. First, you have a tools removing the screw on the side of the desktop. You are going to need for this is a Phillips head screw driver. The side panel you wish to remove to access the internal components will have ventilation similar to what is shown here in the second picture located the two screw on a block of the desktop. One at the top and the other at the bottom. We use the Phillips head screw driver to remove the two screw. On some desktop, such as this one, a switch will need to be moved in order to remove the panel. Simply slide the panel backward and it will come off.
Step 2. There's a little remove power connector. There's little tab on the plastic. There's little tab connectors that must pinch in order to remove the cable from the board. It should be on the outside facing of the connector towards the outside edge of the board. Squeeze, pinch that and gently pull up on the plastic connector, not the wires. Dito naman po, para matanggal yung power connector, hihilahin po natin yung pinaka-plastic niya, tapos para matanggal at hindi yung wires, baka maputol o masira lang yung ating yung power connector.
Remove ID cable. So isang mabilis lang po na paliwanag about ID cable na ang ibig sabihin is integrated drive electronics. So ang ID cables po is ang pagtatanggal niya po sa CPU or sa motherboard is madali lang. Para lang tayo nagtatanggal sa outlet ng bahay natin. Parang sa charger, at ganun din sa pag i-install natin ng IDE. So, yung IDE meron siyang 30 or 240 pins na maninipis. So, kaya iingatan natin yon kasi possible na maputol, possible na hindi na gumana yung mga pins na yun kung hindi natin pag-iingatan yung mga kung mali ang pagkakasalpak natin dun sa motherboard. So, an IDE interface components na meron siyang 20 to 40 and meron din 80 pins na nakadepende yan sa cable na maninipis. Kaya ganun yung itsura niya, parang makikita natin na may parang mga tuldok-tuldok. Malalaman natin dyan kung ano yung bilang no pins na pagsasalpakan at pins na cable. Then, dun sa dun naman sa tanong na kapag paano malalaman kung tama yung pagkakasalpak, pares lang naman na 10 sa upper and 10 sa baba. So, ang sagot diyan is possible na pwede. Kaso, titignan natin kapag nag-boot tayo is kung magiging okay ba yung screen natin, kung anong lilitaw. So, possible siya na gumana at possible din na hindi gumana kasi merong proper way na paraan para i-install si IDE cables. Then, unang-una, the right way on it's either na sa motherboard natin siya ilagay or sa sound card is yung meron siyang mark na dun sa may upper right corner dun sa mismong motherboard or sa sound card meron din doon. So, yun. At meron din makikita din natin yung numbering sa may motherboard nga at dun din makikita natin sa picture na yung red strip, yun yung parang number 1. So, yun yung pwede nating i-install si IDE cable. So, yun lamang po at maraming salamat. Next po.
Remove the power supply. The power supply is attached into tower cabinet at the back end of the tower. Make sure the power connector is detached from the switchboard. Start removing the power connector connected to motherboard, including CPU fan power connector, cabinet fan, the front panel of cabinet, buttons, and all the remaining drives if not detached yet.
Remove expansion card. Wait lang po. Ito po yung how to remove an expansion card from PC. Step 1. Turn off the computer. Remember to back up your data and set a store point. Open the PC case. Locate the expansion card to remove. Move any cables or other obstacle out of the way. If necessary, detach cable or remove these drives. After the procedure is complete, be sure to remember how to install them. Step 5. Free the expansion card slot cover. Unscrew and screw or release the latch holding the slot cover in place. Step 6. Ensure that no cables are attached on the expansion card or in its way. Gently pull out the card, pinch the card with your fingers and thumb and gently ease it out if necessary. Rack the card from front to back. Replace the screw or slot cover if you keep an old slot cover around, put it back over the hole so that console case is intact. Close the console. Turn on the computer.
Remove drives. First, remove the side cover and loose the screws from the side of the unit. After removing the screws, the side cover will slide off from the computer. Once we remove the side cover, we will identify where is the hard drive and we will unplug the power connector or either the IDE or SATA adapters. Once we unplug the cables, we will take out the hard drive and then we will unplug the power cord that connect to the optical drive. Then we will gonna take the screws out so we can take out the optical drive.
Remove motherboard. Ang unang step po sa pag-disassemble ng motherboard ay kailangan pong powering down yung CPU. Tsaka kailangan daw pong i-monitor ang other external device na nakasaksak sa computer. Tapos, remove the hard drives and floppy drives to create room for the removal of the motherboard. And all the expansion cards, daughterboards are removed. Remove all the screws that are on the motherboard, attaching it to the cabinet. Once all the above steps are done, gently remove the motherboard out of the cabinet. Yun lang po.
Step 8. Removing processor fan with heatsink. Removing processor fan from a computer is yet a hard process. Before removing the processor fan, make sure that everything is off, the computer is unplugged, and the tools you need is within your reach. After that, you may now begin the process, starting with removing all the coverings. With that, the processor will be visible. Then proceed with disconnecting the fan by disconnecting the fan wire. And lastly, unclip the heatsink from the processor. Locate the clip that is holding the fan to the processor after unclipping. After unclipping, pull the heatsink away from the processor.
Remove processor. If your CPU goes bad or the socket on your motherboard supports a faster processor than what's installed in your computer, you might need to remove the current CPU to make room for a replacement. Unplugging a CPU from a motherboard is not very difficult task. However, it's a task that needs to be done with care, so you don't damage or ruin a functioning processor. Ito po sir yung 9 step. Step 1, turn off the computer. Wear an anti-static wristband. Open the computer case. Locate the CPU fan and unplug its power cable motherboard from the motherboard. Turn the head of each of the legs. Gently wiggle the heatsink and fan. Remove the latch holding the processor and lift the remaining piece out of the way. Lift the processor straight out of the socket, holding it by its edge. Place the CPU in a safe location if you plan to use it again.
Ito naman po kung paano mag-assemble ng computer. Remove box screw. Step 1, open case. Remove box screw. Take side cover off.
Step 2. Mount motherboard. Number 1. Screw motherboard stands off into the case. Punch out rear I0 plate from the case and replace it with the motherboard I/O plate. Fasten the motherboard in place on top of the mountain stands off.
Sara ko na lang po. Step 3, mount processor. Locate the CPU socket holder on the motherboard. Lift up the latch lever to release and hinge open the CPU socket cover. Holding the CPU by its sides, line up and alignment. Notches are the triangle on the corner of the CPU. To the triangle mark on the motherboard to ensure the correct orientation. Gently place it straight down into the motherboard socket to see the CPU. Lower the CPU socket cover over the CPU and lower the latch lever close again to secure the CPU socket holder close.
Install CPU cooler. If required, apply thermal paste to the back of CPU. Heat CPU heat sink cooler and fix in position. Plug the power cable attached to the cooler fan into the motherboard connector.
Step 5. Install power supply. Mount the power supply and fasten with screw to the case mounting point. Plug the largest cabling connector from the power supply cabling into the motherboard power connector. Plug the 8-pin cabling connector from the power supply cabling into the CPU power connector.
Step 6. Mount memory. Press to open the clips at both ends of the RAM mounting slots. Line up the notch on the RAM stick with the mounting slot. Seat the RAM and press it firmly down into the slot. The tab should automatically latch close as you press the RAM down, securing the RAM in place. Install any other RAM sticks using the same process. Palipat. Install graphic cards. Step 7. Remove the expansion slot covers from the rear of your case where the graphics cards will sit. The graphics card slot into PCI expansion slot on the lower half of the motherboard. Lift it up and firmly the card. Put in the screw to hold the graphics card in place. Plug in the power connector cables from your power sensor. If it's existing, not all graphic cards require external power.
Step 8. Mount the storage drive. Mount the storage drive, the case drive base. Fix the drive in place with screw through the case frame into the case mounting hole located on the storage drive. Connect the drive to the motherboard using a SATA cable. Plug in power cabling to the storage drive. Mount any other storage drive in the same way. Step 9. Mount optical drive. Remove any front panels from the computer case where the optical drive will sit. Mount optical drive in the case by fixing with screw through the case framing to the case mounting holes located on the optical drive. Connect the optical drive to the motherboard using a SATA cable. Plug into power cabling from your power supply to the optical drive. Yun lang po, sir. Thank you po.
Okay guys, tapos na yung ano. Okay, so next group tayo guys. Last bali na to ha, last group. Regardless kung matapos o hindi. Kasi lugi naman kayo pag tinapos natin bigla yung pag dito. Pag nag-isa pa ako baka mag-overtime. Kita po ang screen ko guys. Teka, mali. Ulit.
Bayra, maganda ka na.
Okay, kita po yung screen ko guys.
Yes po, sir.
Okay, so ready na. Okay, so group ni Marzo, taga lang, i-check lang natin. So Marzo group, Abairo, andito po. Taas kamay o bukas mic ha. Okay. Galang.
Dito po, sir.
Okay, Midge. Marzo. May Marzo? Walay? Basco. Dito pala si
Yes.
Dito pala si Clark. Sige. Basco dito. Tapos ang aking loyal reactor, Kyla. Pinagaling.
Present po.
Mga multitasker din to. Marmaro tayo ng Tayo yung minsan na nagkakasalubong yung dalawa sa sakyan Okay, Magno. Magno po. Okay. Lawrence. Ba't di ka na bumabati kay Maya? Dapat dire-diretso lang yun.
Sir, present po.
Kaya ano ka na namin, ilalakad ka na naming lahat. Di ba nagsasabi yung paggabi siya o pagdating ng umaga, hingin mo yung address, pa-deliveran mo kahit almusal lang o kami nang bahala doon pag nag-face to face, kami nang bahala mag-udyok doon. Kinakabahan kayo. Laban na yung pag ganun. Wala naman jowa yun, di ba? O. Tapos last time
Aray.
tayo. Wala namang problema eh. Normal naman sa mga estudyante yan. Kaso hindi ko alam kung sino mas matanda sa inyo. Kasi di ba parang 19 na ata si Araneta. 19 ba? Kasi nagtatrabaho na siya eh.
Baka matanda na yun eh.
Uy, ano naman ako matanda? Age doesn't matter naman. O, Kantaleho, last. Hindi ba kanta? Ay, nandito ko na. Nakita ko na. So, start na po. Last group kayo guys ha, kasi baka mag-OT tayo. Last group. Tapos tuloy na lang yung dalawang susunod ha. Next meeting. Kasi sasabay ko na yung discussion
Sir,
natin.
kaya na po mapasat pa na akin.
Sige, pwede na kayong mag-present.
Forward ko pa sa inyo.
Kayo mag-present. Hindi ako mag-ano dyan. O kung wala, pasend dun sa kung sino yung may laptop, nakaklase. Basta sabihin kung sino. Kasi gagawin ko ng 100 yun kasi pinag-operate nyo eh.
Share screen lang po.
Sige, go na, go. Share screen mo. May wala tayong restriction ngayon. Si Aldep. Okay lang. Siyempre, tama kaya nga, Ubra nga yan. Si Galban. Naku, parang suplado si Truya. Inaano nyo, baka magalit yan, ha? Si Truya, bukas ka nga ng cam mo. Anong masasabi mo dito sa sinasabi ni.
Dito, sir.
Oo.
Okay.
Okay na. Yan si Truya, di ba?
Ito na po, sir.
Sige, go na.
Kita mo ba, sir?
Kita namin.
Sir, good evening, sir. Sir Bossy Avellana, good morning, classmates. This is a group 5 presentation of how to disassemble and rebuild desktop PC. So, group 5, I will mention the members. Group 5, members Galang, Basco, Kahulis, Ginogaling, Apayro, and Magno. Then, ito. In this topic, we will report how to assemble and rebuild a desktop PC personal computer. How to disassemble the rebuild desktop PC. Whether you are taking apart from your computer to scrap, install new. Wait lang. Bakit? Sige. Dalian mo kasi.
Commercial muna, commercial.
Bayan ngayon.
Bayan? Ngayon ko lasin to.
Idolo talaga to, idolo.
Ito na po, sir.
Idolo.
In this topic, we will report how to assemble and rebuild a desktop PC, personal computer. How to disassemble and rebuild a desktop PC. Whether you're taking apart your computer to scrap it, install new components, clean it, or just to see how it works, our guide shows how to take it all apart, then put it back together. Computer disassembly. Our guide covers the most common ways computers are put together, but computers and manufacturers can vary. If you can't access a particular component when it's listed in the guide, skip to the instructions to remove the other parts until you can reach the original component. Generally, the process is to unplug all the cards and cables connecting a component to other components. Then remove the part from the case or frame. Components can be attached to the case with special clips, screws, or by insertion into a holder. In each case, no more than a small amount of force is needed to remove the part. If it's not moving, check for more attachments that are holding the component in place. You will need a small Phillips head screwdriver, and depending on the manufacturer of your components, possibly a flathead screwdriver. The metal inside the computer case can be sharp, so you might want gloves as well. If you are rebuilding the computer, be sure to document. Lawrence, wala pa tayo dun. Taas mo konti. If you are rebuilding the computer, be sure to document what area you remove components from.
the order you remove them, and what cables attached to each part. You can take pictures before each removal or write it down. Keep careful track of the screws as well. Keep the screws with their relevant component by screwing them back in the hose either on the component or on the frame or by tapping them to the correct location. Steps on how to disassemble your PC. Next.
Step, sige. Step 1. Turn off the computer, unplug the power cord, and unplug any peripheral items attached to the computer, such as the keyboard, mouse, monitor, headphones, and any external drives. Wear a grounding strap or touch an unpainted metal part of the computer to discharge any static electricity. If you walk across a carpet at any point, touch an unpainted metal part of the computer again to discharge the build-up static electricity. Step 2. Remove at least one of the side covers, usually the right side as you face at the front of the computer. You might find it easier to access all the parts if you remove both sides covers. There are sometimes stamped screws on the covers to make access easier.
Sino next?
Ako na lang. Hello. Step
Rinig
3.
ka namin.
Disconnect all the connectors, then remove any card readers and internal DVD players. These are usually screwed into place. Step 4. Remove any standalone fan. This is a good time to remove any dust, lint, and pet hair from the fans if you're planning on reusing them.
Step 5. Disconnect the cables and remove the storage drive. Generally, storage drive are held into place by multiple screws. If you have a hard drive, be gentle when moving the drive as hard bumps can damage the internal parts. Step 6. Recover the memory or RAM modules by pushing the clips on both ends of the module down. This will cause the module to pop up for easy removal. Do not touch the gold connector on the chip if you are reusing the modules.
Next.
Impromptu
Hoy, sino nasunod? Ako nasunod nito.
Ako na lang po ulit, sir. Step 5. Disconnect the cables and remove the storage drive. Generally, storage drives are held in place by multiple screws. If you have a hard drive, be gentle when moving the drive as hard bumps can damage the internal parts.
Pre, tapos na dyan, pre.
Step 8 na po, Rods.
Remove any
Step
adapter. Ako dyan, tol. Remove any adapter or expansion cards from the motherboard. Although these cards usually slide into pre-configured slots, there can be screws. Do not touch the gold connectors on the cards if you're reinstalling the cards.
Step 9.
Sir, ako na lang. Kailangan.
Disconnect all the cables from the motherboard. Then unscrew it from the frame by loosening each screw a little bit before going up again to loosen each screw.
This prevents any potential warping of the motherboard by gradually releasing tension on it.
Okay, sir. Part 2 na po to, sir. Aba, ang gagaling niya.
Napaka-organized ng report nyo, ha?
Ganyan talaga, sir.
Sir, ngayon lang kasi naganda sila, sir.
Bigyan mo na lang ng breakfast si Araneta, di ba nagchat na doon sa GC, parang lunch niya ata, oh.
Sana ko na bala paglulutuan ko yun.
Kung malapit lang sa inyo, dalhin mo sa kanila, o ano na 100 na group nyo.
Sige, sir.
Sige, saglitin nyo, na tayo, lampas 2 hours na tayo, ha? Saglitin nyo na yan.
How to assemble. Step 1. Install the processor in the socket. This is probably the hardest part of the whole assembly process. The socket pins are very sensitive and you have to make sure that don't damage if any way, don't behind pull them, break under any circumstances. A damaged socket is a very difficult repair and you will lose a warranty on the motherboard. First, open the socket using locking mechanism. See the motherboard manual details. If you look at the socket and processor more closely, you will find both components have matching notches. These notches ensures that we are only possible way to install the processor correctly. Note that there is a small arrow the processor and the socket. The arrow tells you how you should or even the processor in the socket. The processor must be inserted gently so that snaps your socket the first attempt. Don't even think about adjusting inside the socket if you feel it doesn't fit. Simply remove and try it again. Step number 2. And install the CPU heatsink. The first part of the PC assembly process is done. Now you should install a CPU heatsink. Follow the instruction as specified in the manual. With Intel 6 and 7 generation processors, can be extra careful to make sure all the balls tighten evenly. Take time to pay those attention to what you're doing and tighten the balls in a crosswise pattern. This processor have very thin printed connections and tend to bend up the corners. Once you are done, it's time for the step to installing the RAM. Step 3. Install the memory modules in the motherboard. The installation process may vary depending on the motherboard type and model. Some motherboards have only 2 memory slots, other 4, and with dual slot motherboards, you will find them all with your 4 slot motherboards. You have to mount at least 2 RAM sticks to ensure dual channel operation. Check the manual details. And step 4, next.
Step 4. Install the graphic card. The next step in building your PC is to install the graphics card. Most modern graphics cards are rather hefty, so you need to hold up the card during installation. In most cases, you use the first PCIe 16X slot to mount the card. It's the one closest to the CPU socket. If you have any questions or doubt, check the motherboard's manual. And next, it's time to plug in an SSD or HDD.
Step 5. Connect SSD and HDD drive. Figure out the proper way to plug HDD into SATA connectors. The same procedure applies to optical drive as well. Steps. Connect the PSU to the motherboard to see if everything is working as it should. Plug in the motherboard power supply 20 CX and the power supply 8-pin EPS. The corresponding lead on the bottom of the board should light up. Some boards requires only 4 pins EPS. Others 8 plus 4 EPS or even 2x8 16 EPS.
See you na next.
Step 6. Ay, step 7. Saan ba ako? Step 7.
Go
Test
guys.
the assembly
Hello.
basic
Tapusin na
component.
lang natin to next meeting. Ano na, 8 o'clock na. Baka maireklamo ako eh, ha? Step 7
Kasi
kayo mag-start sa susunod, ha? Pero may ano naman na. Tawag dito, may rubrics naman na kayo dun sa grade. Okay? So, guys, see you all next meeting. So,